I mean, just look at those mountains. Have you like looked up at the mountains lately? Oh my gosh. It's an amazing picture, and the cool part about it is the fact that there's lots of snow up there, but there's lots of warm weather down here in the desert right now. We're having some really great weather, and it's a good day to get out and play some pickleball or play some golf or go for a bike ride, hike, you name it. It is a perfect condition. Well, is the same thing true when it comes to buying a house? Well, we're going to find out today, and we're going to bring in the expert when it comes to everything about mortgages. And he is the guru. I don't want to say guru. He's the expert when it comes to. He has over 4 decades of experience. You are at the Mortgage Minute, which is a show designed to help buyers and sellers understand what are their best options, what are the strategies out there for them, and how can they navigate that. So let's bring him on now. Hey, Art, how you doing today?
Hi, Jeff. Good. How are you?
Good. Hey, is the market for buying a house? Is it as spectacular as the picture behind me?
Well, I think more so than people realize. I think a lot of folks don't think it's that good, that spectacular. But I think we're starting to see some folks starting to rethink that, and things are not as bad as perceived. And that's kind of what I want to touch on this week, particularly given the way we saw some pretty interesting turmoil in the financial markets earlier this week. So I definitely want to get into that a little bit more. So.
I can't wait to get into it, but it reminds me of that saying. It's the beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
And you see that really, really stand out when you go to an art gallery and somebody is looking at something, and I'm going, what exactly is that? But they see it differently, and then vice versa.
Right.
So I look forward to you helping us interpret these markets. Hey, before I jump out of here, though, I do want to let people know this is a live show. I'll be over monitoring the comments. And if you have something that you want to share with Art, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube, just put it in the comments. It'll pop up, and then Art will address that. Of course, you can always get a hold of Art if you miss this and you're watching it as it's been recorded, and you can put the information on there. Same place, comments, and Art will check that out. He'll get back with you. Art, with that, I'm going to turn over to you. Have a great show.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute. I'm Art Alvarez at MortgageWorks, where we have the answers and they're on the house. We're back to our usual format this week after I was out of town the last couple of weeks with different programs. And as you know, or may remember, we like to start off by giving a little bit of an update on the mortgage interest rate market and the bond market, particularly the Treasury bond market. Here's our rate grid. It's been updated with current rates available. And of course, it does reflect some of the increases that we've seen in mortgage rates here in the last couple of weeks, certainly off our low point in late December when we were getting kind of close to a 6% conforming rate. Of course, we're back up higher from that. And then one of the things I really want to get into this week is what happened in the financial markets, in particular the bond market, because that chart, as Jeff is pulling up now, I mean, look at that. That's a very interesting chart for the 10-year Treasury bond yield over the last 5 days. And as Jeff's pointing out right there, look at that extreme straight up vertical increase that we saw on Tuesday. That is a very, very dramatic change in the yield all at once when the market opened on Tuesday. What triggered that? Well, this is a good example of what I put on the bottom of my slide when we always talk about this first opening segment about mortgage rate and bond market update. This reflects, that straight up line reflects how financial markets respond with reptilian-like minds to stimuli. And what I'm referring to is on Tuesday, the CPI was released. That's the Consumer Price Index. That's often called the inflation index at a retail level. So there's CPI, Consumer Price Index, and then the core CPI, which excludes energy and housing, or food and energy, I should say. And it's really interesting, this reaction we saw this week. The number released this week showed that CPI year over year, that's YOY, was 3.1% year over year. Now, what caused the jitters, that skyrocketing increase in the 10-year bond yield on Tuesday, was it was disappointing because 2.9 was forecast. But never mind the fact that in December, year over year CPI was higher. It was 3.4. So the year over year number in January dropped from 3.4 to 3.1. But because the forecast was that it was supposed to drop further under 3, the markets freaked out. If you may recall, the stock market was off over 500 points on Tuesday. The core CPI, a similar situation. Year over year, January, it was released at 3.9%, which was unchanged from December, also 3.9%. But the forecast was that the core CPI year over year would be lower at 3.7. So because the CPI did not come out lower as forecast, and the core CPI did not come out lower as forecast, and yet remained either lower than the month before, like the CPI, or the same as the month before, like the core CPI, the bond market shot up. The 10-year bond yield increased by 15 basis points or 0.15%. That's over an eighth in rate. And then, of course, the stock market off by over 500 points. So the panic was, inflation is not slowing down any further, and maybe the Fed's going to now back off on lowering the Fed funds rate. In fact, now in the Fed funds futures market, I think at the last I saw, there's like a 93% probability there'll be no change in the Fed funds rate in March. The hope was we'd see a reduction, our first reduction in 2024 in the Fed funds rate. Most market observers are now thinking that's not going to happen. And then what's going to be happening the rest of the week? Well, today we had retail sales. Retail sales were forecast to be minus 0.2%. Well, guess what? Retail sales actually came out today minus 0.8%. So retail sales definitely down, certainly down from December when it was 0.6 up. And then with initial claims for unemployment, 220,000 were forecast for this week. And it turns out, or for last week, and it turns out it was 212. So actually a reduction in initial claims for unemployment. What that has caused an interesting situation with the 10-year bond. It's now improved. We're off that 433 high from Tuesday. We're now down to about 423. And guess what? The stock market has come all the way back, pretty much got back all of the losses that occurred on Tuesday because of the CPI release. And then the remaining, I think, important data point that'll be out tomorrow will be the PPI. That's the producer price index, and the core PPI, again, excluding food and energy. That's called inflation at a wholesale level. Is it going to be hot or not? Well, we don't know. The PPI year over year, the forecast for tomorrow is a 0.6% for January. It was 1.0% in December. So that's actually a forecast for a reduction in PPI. And then the core PPI, 1.6% is the year over year forecast for January. 1.85 is where it was in December. So again, a forecast that's going to drop a little bit. So hopefully that happens, because if it doesn't, we could see another kind of reaction like we saw on Tuesday with the CPI. So we'll just have to wait and see. But what this underscores is how these data points, when released, the initial reaction sometimes can be quite severe. And then once the market kind of settles in and analyzes the data with a little bit more time and thought put into it, oftentimes we'll see things kind of settle down. And we've seen that both with the stock market and with the interest rate market, with the 10-year bond yield coming down, and therefore mortgage rates are settling down a little bit too. But again, we're still up there off our lows from late December. And so with that, that's your update for the mortgage market, mortgage rates, and the bond market. And one of the things I want to get into is I caught an article recently that came out in early this month, early February. And it was actually an interesting article that really caught my attention because it did a very good job of describing, I think, where we are at with the housing market and the real estate and interest rate market right now. This was an article that was published back on February 2nd of this year, earlier this month, from Time. I want to say Time Magazine, but maybe I should say Time Digital. I mean, most of these articles now are more online than in the actual magazine. And it was written by a lady named Ilana Samuels. And so one of the things that was interesting is what caught my attention was the headline: "Is it finally time to buy a house?" And as I read through the article, there were so many different quotes in there. I just had to share some of them with you because I think you can all relate. And I think this article very well describes sort of the overall outlook of the housing market right now. Very early in the article, it starts off with, "It's not fun. It's not a fun time to try and buy a house." We've talked about that a lot. Rates are up. Buyers have been on the sidelines waiting for rates to come down. Sellers who would like to sell and get a bigger, nicer home or maybe a different location, they're locked in because they have 2 and 3% mortgages. They've got a lot of equity, but they're afraid to sell because they don't know where they're going to go, and they don't want to replace their 3% mortgage with one that's at 6.5. And one of the other quotes that I saw in here, this is from Jacob Channel. He's a senior economist at LendingTree. And I thought his quote was very, very apropos. "If you hyper fixate on mortgage rates, you're not going to do anything other than drive yourself completely insane." I cannot agree with that more. I'm always urging folks to calm down, take this in perspective in terms of where mortgage rates are. In fact, one of the things I've said very often when people are complaining about where we are at with mortgage rates, I'll often say, look, only in America will folks go out. Maybe tonight we just had Valentine's Day. Only in America, maybe you just went out and had a nice Valentine's Day with your spouse or your significant other, and you may have put a couple $100 or more, food prices are up, on that 20% credit card. And yeah, sure, you're going to pay it off immediately. But only in America will you go out and have a nice dinner and put a couple $100 or more on a credit card at 20%. And then complain about a 6 or 6.5% mortgage rate. Of course, I use a little different term for complain, but the point of that is we got to keep that in perspective. And one of the other points made by the writer of this article, but the super low mortgage rates of 2020, 2021, indeed, the sub 4% mortgage rates that marked much of the last decade, that's true, they're long gone. I've said that for quite some time now. The 2 and 3% mortgages, certainly under 4% mortgages, those are long gone. We're not going to see that anytime recently. And of course, another economist, Lisa Sturdivant, she's the chief economist with Bright MLS, a multiple listing service. She, of course, was commented or quoted as saying, "We're in an era where mortgage rates will be elevated. We're not going to see rates down at 3% in our lifetime." Again, I can't underscore that more. I fully agree with that. So we need to get past that and move on. And of course, part of the consternation about where we're at with mortgage rates going into this year after the initial optimism late December of 23 is what the Fed is saying. The Fed is saying the economic outlook is uncertain. The committee remains highly attentive to inflation risks. That was quoted from the Federal Open Market Committee that they said in a statement. So obviously the Fed is still not fully convinced inflation's under control, and that's causing some lessening of the enthusiasm that we're going to see the Fed being aggressive about rate cuts. And the other thing that was pointed out, which we've talked about a lot, is, and again, from this economist Sturdivant, she says, "I do think we're going to be in this low inventory environment until at least 2030. Again, I agree with that. We have low inventory, although it's gotten better. It's not quite as bad. Inventory has creeped up a bit. We're getting closer to a normal inventory situation, but overall, we're going to have a relatively low inventory situation for probably several years to go." And then coupled with that, I've talked about this a lot too, CoreLogic, the Case-Shiller Index, most recently, that index shows that at least nationally in November of 23, for example, home prices rose 5% compared to November of 22. That's a pretty good increase. So all this concern that property values are going to fall or that inventory is going to grow and that's going to cause property values to fall, I think that's misplaced, not well-founded, and I don't think it's going to happen. In fact, if we really got a good improvement in mortgage rates, I think while inventory may increase a little bit more, that's actually going to cause probably prices to go up, not down, which is why I continue to say people really should think about getting into the housing market now. And then lastly, The one last quote I want to mention to you again from this Jacob Channel, the senior economist at LendingTree. It's tempting to think what would have happened if you bought when mortgage rates were 3%. But that's not all that different from wondering what would have happened if you bought Amazon stock in 1999. Of course, you'd be a bazillionaire, right? So you can't look back like that. You've got to move forward. That was then, this is now. Again, those 2 and 3% mortgage rates, they're long gone, not going to be back in our lifetime. Let's move on and forget about it, right? And the last thing I want to mention, I thought this was a great quote again by this economist, Jacob Channel. It's wistful nostalgia for Helicon days. So that's what that is when folks are still longing for those 2 and 3% mortgages. They're gone. It's wistful nostalgia. We need to move on, and we need to deal with current conditions. Therefore, with that as a backdrop, what I want to get into is why this article, I think, actually underscores that it is or can be a good time to buy. And so I cover that in this next slide, where, again, I've got this headline still showing. But what I want to point out is, so what do you do about getting into the housing market? Or if you're already a homeowner, what do you do if you're thinking about maybe you do need to sell, you want to sell, but you're worried about what kind of rates you're going to get if you're giving up a 2 or 3% mortgage? Well, I think the way you deal with the current environment, and given all of the bullet points I just mentioned on the previous slide, I say, yes, it is a good time. It is a time to finally buy. But I argue you should use if you're a buyer, use what I call a 3 to 5% seller concession offer strategy. And I might even tweak that and say, use a 2 to 5% seller concession offer strategy. Now, let me explain what I mean by that phrase. First of all, understand something known as a sold trend. What is a sold trend? Well, a sold trend is where you look at recent real estate activity, recent closings in a market, and you can look at this on various MLS systems, or we look at this here in the Coachella Valley. There's a desert housing report where we can see sold trends from month to month. A sold trend is the ratio of list price to sold price. And what you can see in a lot of markets, and we're seeing that here in the Coachella Valley as well as in Southern California as a whole, we are starting to see more cases where homes are selling for something approaching list price, but a little bit below. Sometimes 1.5% to 2% below list price, sometimes 3 or 4%, maybe as much as 5% below list price. So in other words, that sold trend, that ratio of list price to sold price, is more often being seen in that range of homes selling between, say, 95 to 98% of their list price. That's important to recognize because that's an opportunity. If you're a home buyer and you're out there looking at homes and you see a home that's been on the market now, active listing, maybe for approaching 30 days or 40 days or 45 or 50 days, and if you see that it's still an active listing and you don't see that there's been any price adjustments made by the seller and their listing agent after that period of time on the MLS system, that's an opportunity. So let me show you how. For example, if you're looking at using a conventional loan, conventional conforming loan, and you're going to have a down payment that's going to be less than 10%. The first thing to understand is there is a limit as to how much concession you can negotiate from the seller. That limit is going to be 3% of the purchase price, or your offer price in this case. So just understand, if you're putting less than 10% down, you can request or negotiate a seller concession, but the amount you can negotiate to get from the seller has to be no more than 3% of your offer price. And what if you're successful getting that 3% in your offer price? Well, how would you use it? Well, of course, one thing that most people do all the time is they just submit an offer 3% below the list price. They offer lower price. And I've said before, yeah, that's fine. That's the most common thing that buyers do. Aha, home's not sold. It's 40 days in the market. I'm going to offer not 800. I'm going to offer, 775. I'm just going to take 3% right off the top because it must be priced too high. Well, I would argue that's not your best approach. Get the concession amount, but don't just take it off the price, because that's going to give you some benefit if you're financing your purchase by lowering your payment somewhat. But remember, every $1,000 less borrowed is only $6 a month in lower payment. So it's not as powerful as other ways to use that 3% concession. If you get that 3% concession, don't just take a price reduction. Instead, ask for that concession as a credit from the seller and then use it. Use it for what? Your loan. You can either permanently buy down your mortgage rate, or you can use it for a temporary buy down, such as a 2-1. Remember, I said a 2-1 buy down typically costs about 2.25% of your loan amount, which, of course, if it's 2.25% of your loan amount and you're putting 20% down, then that as a percentage of the purchase price, which is what the concession limit is based on, is even less than 2.25%. And so if you do that, you can either use the 3% to permanently buy down the rate, use all of the concession, the 3% concession, just for that purpose. Or if you're going to use it for a 2-1 temporary buy down, there's going to be leftover money from that 3% concession. Use that to apply towards your closing costs. So that way you're getting both a reduction in your payment schedule for the next couple of years, and you're getting a reduction in your cash to close because you're using that 3% concession for both the rate buy down and for some of your closing costs. So that's what you would do when you're putting less than 10% down. Now, if you're getting a conventional loan, conforming loan with 10% down, or if you're getting an FHA loan, even with a minimum 3.5% down payment, the concession limit's much higher. It's 6% of the purchase price, not 3%. That's a good bucket of money that can be used very effectively to greatly improve your financing terms over just requesting a lower purchase price in your offer. With a 6% seller concession, and maybe you don't think you can get 6% out of the seller, but as I would argue, based on sold trends, you might certainly be able to get 5%. So whether it's 5% or 6%, focus on the fact that get that concession not in a price reduction if you're financing your purchase, get it as a credit, and then use that effectively to improve your financing terms, such as you can then use that 6% also for a permanent rate buy down. But understand you can only do that to a certain level, because the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, they do have a limit on points and fees that are allowed to be paid on a mortgage transaction. And that's true whether it's paid for by the seller or for the buyer. And that's generally right around 3%. So if you're getting a seller concession that's 5 to 6% of the purchase price, you can only select a rate, a permanent rate buy down to a level where the cost is not going to exceed about 3% of the loan amount because of the CFPB limit. So then what do you do with all this extra money? Well, in my opinion, you're better off either using that for the permanent rate buy down as far as you can go, and then take the balance of that, apply it towards your closing costs, although make sure that the remaining portion of being applied to your closing costs doesn't exceed the actual cost, because they cannot. They can only be applied to actual closing costs that you're incurring. But a better approach, I think, is use the 6%, or maybe even if it's a 5% seller concession. Don't get it in a price reduction. Get it in a credit from the seller. Use it for a 3-2-1 buy down. 3-2-1 buy down gets your first year rate at current rate levels in the 3s. That's what buyers are longing for. They want to get back to the 3s. You can get that now through a 3-2-1 buy down. Yes, it's temporary, but remember, the 3-2-1 buy down provides you that below market rate in the 3s the first year, in the 4s the second year, in the 5s the third year. You don't get to your actual note rate in the 6s till the 4th year. You've got a 3-year window enjoying that below market rate and payment schedule to look for that opportunity to refinance your note rate into a much lower rate. That's why a buy down is such a great idea. It gets you into a home now, so you can take advantage of future appreciation. It gives you a below market rate and payment schedule for 3 years. And then you're set up to have that window to look for a refi opportunity, get that note rate down for long term. And again, even with the 3-2-1, which generally costs around 4.25%, 4 3/8% of your loan amount, if you get a 5 or 6% concession out of the seller, use the rest of that toward covering your other remaining closing costs, so it reduces your overall cash to close. So again, I can't harp on this enough. There is opportunities to get some seller concessions right now, depending on the age of the listing. Don't just knee-jerk go for the price reduction. Be more strategic. Get with us. Get with your own lender if you've got one. If you're an agent, you got a preferred lender. Talk to your lender. Talk to us. We can give you better ideas about how to use that seller concession towards your buyer's financing, or you, the buyer's financing situation, to greatly improve your financing terms. I really, really think this is what people should focus on to get into the housing market now, get into home ownership, and then take advantage of future appreciation that we all think is probably going to occur. So hopefully that makes some sense for you. I hope it does. And again, if you have any interest in finding out more about this, or would like to talk about certain numbers, I'm happy to provide those to you on a particular situation. So just give me a call me or email me, and I'll be happy to do that. So with that, I want to get into the closing question from last week. And of course, this is actually from a couple of weeks ago when we last had our normal format before I was out of town. So here it is. The closing question back then was, what is the difference between a VA loan and a CalVet loan? Good question. CalVet is a program that's been around a long time and not very well known. So that's why I thought it was a good question to cover. First of all, what is a VA loan? Well, I think most of us all know what that is. A VA loan is it's for a veteran, and it's a federal loan program that is administered by the Department of Veteran Affairs, or the DVA. And it's for veterans who meet the eligibility criteria and features 100% financing. So this is for military veterans or for people who are still in active military, and it does provide you that ability to get zero down payment financing. Now, the way that's done is the Department of Veteran Affairs, the DVA, they provide a federal guarantee to the lender, and it covers the risk associated with lending with zero down payment, because statistically, default rates are going to be higher the lesser the down payment made by the borrower. So with a VA loan, there is a guarantee fee that is charged as part of getting that loan. It's typically financed into your loan amount. And this guarantee fee ensures the lender in case the veteran borrower defaults. Then the lender can then submit a claim to the Department of Veteran Affairs and get reimbursed for their foreclosure loss. Now, a CalVet loan is, as the name might imply, is a more specific program for veterans, but in the state of California. And it's, believe it or not, it's been around for a little over 100 years. It was first put in place back by the Veterans Farm and Home Purchase Act, which is now called the CalVet Home Loan Program, signed into law by Governor William Stevens. We all remember him, right? Probably not. Why? Because it was May 30th, 1921. So the CalVet program has actually been around for a little over 100 years. CalVet is a California state agency authorized to provide home loans to California veterans and their families. California state voter-approved bonds provide the funding for this financing, so it's not at taxpayers' expense. Eligibility for a CalVet loan is actually a little bit less. You only need 90 days of active service. You do have to be 100% honorably discharged. And you can also get 100% financing in most cases, just like a federal VA loan. Now, the title to your home is a little bit different than a VA loan. With a VA loan, you do have title to your home. With a CalVet loan, a contract of sale, contract for sale is used. So what this means is the state, California, is the owner of your home, but the veteran borrower holds equitable title. And that's not something to be scared of. I mean, you still effectively have ownership of your home. So it's just a kind of a unique and special title situation that's used by CalVet for these particular loans. These loans can be very effective and useful in certain situations. It's not uncommon for a veteran borrower to be able to get approved on a CalVet loan when they can't get approved on a VA loan. A CalVet loan is also good for veteran borrowers who are looking to purchase in more rural areas. They can also be used for purchase of manufactured homes, even those that are not fixed to the land. So again, a CalVet loan can be a very good option for a veteran borrower. And so I want you to be aware of that if you are a veteran borrower, to keep it in mind, because it could be something that might be worth worthwhile for you to look at, and we can certainly help you with that. So again, good question on that, the CalVet loan versus the VA loan. And if you have any interest in learning more, feel free to contact me on that. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and go into our closing question for next week. And this is a good one, especially since I've been talking so much about temporary buy downs and how to take advantage of the current market conditions and why you should get into looking for a home now, not later, and not let mortgage rates worry you and demotivate you from looking to buy a home. So here's the question. You often speak to negotiating seller concessions, like I just did, when making an offer on a home to enhance the purchase loan terms. Is there a limit on the amount of funds a seller can provide a buyer for financing concessions? Well, of course, in my previous slide, I did touch on that a little bit, but there's more to it. So we'll cover this question in more detail next week, where I'll have the answers and they'll be on the house. Jeff, back to you.
I think I want to go out and buy a house. I just have to convince my wife. It is so funny. It's like we just get used to those conditions, but we get fixated on things like that. And it's like, I remember way back in, when we became old enough to buy an automobile, I recall the salesperson said, it's not how much you're paying for the car. It's what is your monthly payment? What can you afford? Like he convinced me that was the most important part. And at the end of the day, it really was. Like, how much can I afford to pay for this car? And it's kind of the same thing with the home, isn't it?
Well, exactly right. I mean, that's what's so a little bit interesting and odd about home buying versus car buying, because I think you're right that in a lot of cases, when you're buying that car, it ultimately does come down to the monthly payment. And actually, when it comes to getting a mortgage and to buy a house, at some point in the process, the monthly payment becomes a big issue. Usually when, maybe they get their offer accepted and they have offered and got a lower price accepted versus the list price. And if they haven't already talked to somebody like me and they come to somebody like me to, find out what the financing terms are going to look like, then the monthly payment can become a real big issue, to the point where they say, hey, wait a minute, that's not what I want. Well, what's unfortunate about that is they didn't think about how to get that concession, that price reduction in their offer, get it in a different way to address the monthly payment concern. And that's what I'm trying to really just speak to over and over, and as much as I can, is I'm often being asked to pre-qualify buyers by agents, and oftentimes, or at least more often now than we've seen the last few years, hey, I need you to pre-qualify this buyer. We're looking at this house. Here's the list price, but we're going to offer this amount below that list price. And I'm almost daily now, I'm telling the agent, okay, I'll do it, but wait a minute. Can I at least give me the opportunity? Can I show you how we can use those same dollars in a different, better way for your buyer and apply it to their financing terms? And I'm getting more response of, okay, sure. And what's good about that is I'm now more successfully convincing some agents to take my advice and tweak their offer, or go back and revise their offer and get that concession a different way so I can apply it toward the loan terms. That's why I've got now several new transactions involving temporary buy downs that started with pre-qualify based on this lower price below list. And I talked them out of it and said, no, go back close to list. Let's get those dollars in a better way. And if I have a chance to show that to the agent and their buyers, I'm pretty comfortable in a lot of cases they're going to like it and go that direction.
Well, when we think about there's a process of learning, and the first stage of learning is unconscious incompetence. Like, they don't even know what they don't know, right? And that's why you said, it's like, how many times do you need to repeat this? Well, in the world of online, sometimes we need to see that same message up to 21 times before we say, oh, I get it. And so I'm grateful that you keep beating that drum, as you say, because it is so important. It makes so much sense. And I'm glad that at least now the mindset is, because I know when we first started this, is like, the pushback was like, I'm not interested. Like your agents weren't even open to talking about that. And now they're like, well, yeah, what else is out there? I think you've done a great job with that. So hats off to you for that.
Well, we only have, I think we only have 13 more times to go in terms of repeating the message. So,
Yeah. Hey, and I want to point out too, if you're watching this and you say, "Hey, I'd like to know a little more about this buy down thing," Art recorded an on-demand webinar that goes through this step by step, how it works, how it could be advantageous for you as a seller and a buyer.
yeah,
And you know what I'll do is I'll make sure to put it into the description below. And so if anybody's interested in that, or because they are interested in it, they can watch that and have a really good understanding before they call you and say, "Hey, I'm ready."
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, please
Good.
do. I think that would be helpful to prospective home buyers to really take a look at that and get a basic feel for the fundamentals of temporary buy downs. And then with that information, I think I'll be able to help them more quickly realize how good of an opportunity it really is.
It just makes so much sense. I mean, I remember when you were doing this, you're talking about that first year in your example. I think it was like on a $620,000 loan. It was like $800 a month's difference in their loan payment the first year because of that temporary buy down, which was because of the seller concessions. I believe that was somewhere in the neighborhood.
Yeah, that was an example that we used actually in the online on-demand course where we
Mm.
used a purchase price of 625 with 20% down, loan amount of 500,000, and we were able to show how the net improvement of using the 3-2-1 buy down instead of taking that concession in a lower price would save that buyer over $800 a month the first year.
That's just amazing.
That is an amazing number, and it directly addresses prospective buyers' concerns about payment, and again gives them that 3-year window to then refinance into a lower rate when the opportunity presents itself. So,
I love that. Well, if you want to learn more, his information is on the screen. Art Alvarez with Mortgage Work. He is in Palm Springs, but he services the entire state of California. 760-883-5700 is his office number. You can catch him there, or you can always catch him on the hotline. It is flashing red and it buzzes in his pocket. 714-612-9035. That's the red phone. Remember that if you want to get a hold of Art right away. And of course, always go to the website. There's all kinds of information there. You saw it at the beginning of the show. There's a rate grid on there, but there's also all kinds of calculators and tools you can research there. And of course, you can always send Art a message at art@mwloan.com. Art, you did a great job today. I'm excited about this. I think you're continue to help a lot of people, and go rate buy down.
yep. Thanks, Jeff. Yes, thanks everyone. Thanks for watching this week's Mortgage Minute. I'm Art Alvarez with Mortgage Works, and as Jeff said, yes, go rate buy down. Please get in touch with me if you want to learn more about how to be able to take advantage of current market conditions and buy a home now, not later. So thank you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care. We'll see you next week.